The night I realized our savings were gone, the house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum like it was breathing for me. I was sitting at the dining table with a cup of chamomile tea that had already gone cold, staring at the glow of my laptop screen. I hadn't meant to snoop. That's the truth. I was only looking for the electric bill confirmation because Mark had asked me, offhandedly, if I'd paid it yet. My fingers moved out of habit, clicking into our shared bank account the same way they had for 23 years. At first, my brain didn't understand what my eyes were seeing. The numbers didn't look wrong in a dramatic way. There was no big red warning sign, no overdraft notice, just emptiness. A balance that looked like it belonged to someone starting out in life, not a couple in their mid-50s who had spent decades being careful. I refreshed the page once, then again. My throat tightened, and for a moment I honestly thought I might faint. I pressed my palm flat against the table, grounding myself in the smooth wood Mark had refinished himself one summer when we couldn't afford a vacation. The tea smelled faintly of honey and flowers, and I remember thinking very clearly, this can't be right. That was the moment everything I thought I knew about my marriage cracked. Before that night, my life had been ordinary, comfortably so. Mark and I weren't flashy people. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house on a quiet street where everyone waved but rarely lingered. Our kids were grown, our daughter, Elise, living 2 states away with her own family, and our son, Jonah, just finishing grad school. Our days had settled into a rhythm that felt earned. Mark woke before dawn, always had. I'd hear him moving around the kitchen, the soft clink of his mug against the counter, the low murmur of the radio tuned to the local news. By the time I came downstairs, he'd already be dressed for work, tie loosened, hair still damp from the shower. "Morning, Em," he'd say, leaning in to kiss my temple. His kisses were gentle now, unhurried, familiar. I worked part-time at the library, a job I loved for its quiet and its order. Mark worked in facilities management for the school district. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. We talked about retirement more seriously in the last few years, where we might go, how we'd spend our time. He wanted to fish more. I wanted to travel, even if it was just road trips and bed and breakfasts. We had savings, not millions, but enough that I slept well at night. Family had always been important to Mark, especially his younger sister Diane. Diane had been a constant presence in our marriage, like a familiar piece of furniture you didn't always notice until you tripped over it. She was 5 years younger than Mark, divorced twice, and perpetually on the edge of some new crisis. A job that didn't work out, a landlord who had it out for her, a car that broke down at the worst possible moment. Mark had stepped into the role of protector early on, especially after their parents passed. I never resented that, truly. I admired his loyalty. "She's had a hard life," he'd say, whenever I raised an eyebrow. "I'm all she's got." And for years, helping Diane meant small things. A loan here, fixing her sink, letting her stay with us for a few weeks between apartments. Annoying sometimes, yes, but manageable. That changed about 6 months before the night I found the empty account. It started with phone calls, more of them, longer ones. Mark would step outside to take them, even when it was cold. I'd watch him through the window, his shoulders hunched, his free hand rubbing the back of his neck. When he came back in, his smile would be thinner, his eyes distant. "What's going on with Diane?" I asked one evening as we cleared the dishes. He sighed heavily. "Same old stuff. She's in trouble again." "What kind of trouble?" He shrugged. "Financial. She's behind on rent, might lose the place." I dried my hands slowly. "We can't keep bailing her out, Mark. You know that." "I know," he said quickly. Too quickly. "I'm just helping her figure things out." After that, little things began to shift. Mark started checking the mail before I could. He changed the password on our bank account, then acted surprised when I noticed. "Oh, yeah," he said, waving a hand. "The bank said we should update it for security. I meant to tell you." I let it go. I always let things go. Some nights he came to bed late, smelling faintly of cigarette smoke, even though he didn't smoke. "Diane does," he explained when I asked. "She was crying. I couldn't just leave her like that." There was a tightness in my chest I couldn't name. Not jealousy, not exactly, more like a quiet alarm bell I kept pressing snooze on. I trusted my husband. That trust was woven into the fabric of my days, into grocery lists and shared calendars, and the way we automatically reached for each other at church. So when I saw the numbers on the screen that night, my first instinct wasn't anger. It was confusion. I clicked into the transaction history, the scrolling wheel spun, then stopped. Transfers, large ones, over months. My fingers trembled as I traced the gates. Some of them lined up with nights he'd come home late, nights he'd said Diane needed me. I closed the laptop gently, like it might shatter as I moved too fast. The front door opened a few minutes later. Mark's footsteps sounded heavy, tired. "In the kitchen," I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. He walked in, loosening his tie, already halfway into his usual end-of-day complaints about work. Then he saw my face. "What's wrong?" he asked. I folded my hands in my lap, looked at the man I had loved for over 2 decades. "Mark," I said quietly, "where is our money?" The silence that followed was thick, heavy, the kind that presses on your ears. He didn't answer right away, and in that pause, I knew, deep in my bones, that whatever came next would change everything. Mark pulled out the chair across from me, but he didn't sit right away. He stood there, hands gripping the backrest, knuckles pale. The overhead light cast shadows under his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. Or maybe they'd always been there, and I'd just never looked closely enough. "What do you mean?" he asked, finally lowering himself into the chair. I slid the laptop across the table and opened it again, the glow lighting up the space between us like a confession neither of us wanted to hear. I turned the screen so he could see the balance. "This," I said, "this is what I mean." He stared at it, too long, long enough that my chest started to ache. "It's not gone," he said slowly. "Not exactly." I waited. He leaned back, exhaled, rubbed his face with both hands. When he dropped them, his expression had settled into something practiced, calm, reasonable. "I told you," he said, "I'm helping Diane." I blinked. "Helping her doesn't mean emptying our savings, Mark." "It's not emptied," he snapped, then softened his tone. "Look, she was in real trouble, Emily, real trouble. I couldn't just stand by." "How much?" I asked. He hesitated. "How much?" I repeated, my voice shaking now despite my effort. "Most of it," he admitted quietly. The word landed like a physical blow. I pushed back my chair and stood, pacing to the sink. The window above it reflected my face back at me, older than I felt, paler. I gripped the edge of the counter, breathing through the tightness in my chest. "Most of it," I repeated. "You took most of our retirement savings without telling me." "I was going to tell you," he said quickly, "once things settled down." "When?" I turned to face him. "After it was all gone?" He stood too, his movements abrupt. "You're making it sound worse than it is." I laughed then. It surprised both of us. It wasn't humor. It was disbelief, raw and sharp. "Worse than it is?" I said. "Mark, that money is our life. It's what we planned. It's what I worked for." "I worked for it too," he said defensively. "Yes," I agreed. "We worked for it, together, which is why you don't get to make decisions like this alone." He opened his mouth, closed it. His shoulders slumped. She was going to lose the apartment. She has nowhere else to go. She could have stayed here, I said immediately. You know that. He shook his head. No, she didn't want that. That should have been my second clue. The first had already passed. Instead, I asked, so where is the money now? He hesitated again, and this time something cold slid down my spine. It's invested, he said. Invested where? With Diane, he replied. She found an opportunity. The room seemed to tilt. What kind of opportunity? I asked carefully. Real estate, he said. She knows someone. It's a flip. Quick turnaround. We'll make it all back. I stared at him, searching his face for doubt, for fear, for anything that told me he understood the magnitude of what he'd done. All I saw was stubborn certainty. You trusted her with our savings? I whispered. She wouldn't lie to me, he said. She's my sister. I went to bed that night without saying anything else. I don't remember brushing my teeth. I don't remember changing my clothes. I remember lying awake, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly above me, each rotation dragging another memory with it. Our first apartment, the years we lived paycheck to paycheck, the night we celebrated paying off the mortgage with a bottle of cheap champagne and laughter that echoed through the empty house. I believed we were partners. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I spent the day doing what I should have done months earlier. I logged into every account I could access, dug through old statements, pieced together a timeline. The pattern was worse than I'd imagined. Monthly transfers, sometimes weekly, amounts large enough to make my stomach churn. Each one marked with a vague note, family help, investment, loan. There was no contract, no documentation, just trust. I called Diane. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and breathless. Emily? What a surprise! Diane, I said, keeping my tone even. We need to talk. Oh, she said lightly. About what? About our money. There was a pause, just a fraction too long. I don't know what you mean, she said. I closed my eyes. Mark says he's been helping you, that our savings are tied up in a property. Oh, she said, relief flooding her voice. That, yes, it's all fine. He didn't explain? No, I said, he didn't. Well, she continued, it's complicated. These things take time. How much time? I asked. Another pause. Emily, she said, her tone shifting, becoming faintly condescending. Mark understands. You don't need to worry yourself over the details. Something snapped inside me then. A quiet thing, but final. Diane, I said, this is my marriage, my money. You don't get to decide what I worry about. She sighed. I'm busy right now. Where is the property? I asked. She laughed. You're being dramatic. I hung up without another word. That evening, Mark came home to find me sitting at the table again, a folder in front of me this time. He glanced at it, then at my face. You called her, he said. Yes. She's under a lot of stress. You shouldn't have... Stop, I said softly. He stopped. I slid the folder toward him. I want details, addresses, contracts, timelines. He flipped it open, frowning. Why? Because right now, I said, I don't know whether my husband was foolish or dishonest. The word hung between us. His jaw tightened. I didn't cheat on you, he said sharply. I didn't say you did. But you're acting like... I'm acting like someone whose trust was broken. Those aren't the same thing. He stared at me, and for the first time since this began, I saw fear flicker across his face. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said quietly. But you did, I replied. The next few weeks passed in a blur of tension and half-truths. Mark avoided my questions, Diane avoided my calls, and the more I pressed, the more defensive he became. One night, as he slept beside me, I reached for his phone. I'd never done that before. The guilt made my hands shake. But something deep inside me whispered that there was more. There had to be. The phone unlocked easily. My birthday. Another habit I'd never thought to question. I scrolled through his messages with Diane. At first, they looked harmless. Updates, encouragement. Then I saw the tone shift. Urgency, reassurance. Don't tell Emily yet. She wouldn't understand. Once the sale goes through, she'll see. And then, buried deeper, a message that made my breath catch. The house is almost ready. Buyer coming this week. House. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I didn't recognize any address in the earlier messages. There had been no house mentioned to me, no tour, no conversation. I saved the address to my phone. The next morning, while Mark left for work as usual, I drove across town to a neighborhood I'd never been to before. The house sat on a quiet corner lot, freshly painted, with a for sale sign planted proudly in the front yard. I parked across the street and sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel. This was real. Our money wasn't just gone, it was living a life I'd never been invited into. And standing there, watching strangers walk through a house I'd unknowingly paid for, I realized something else, too. This wasn't just about Diane. This was about the choices Mark had made again and again to protect her, at my expense. I drove home with a clarity that felt both terrifying and calm. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. But I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. By the time Mark came home that evening, I had already made dinner. That might sound strange, given everything, but cooking has always been my way of thinking, of steadying my hands. I chopped onions slowly, deliberately, letting the sting in my eyes mask the other burn I didn't want to name yet. The smell of garlic filled the kitchen, familiar and grounding. Mark paused in the doorway when he saw me at the stove. "You're quiet," he said. "So are you," I replied. We ate mostly in silence. The clink of forks against plates sounded louder than usual. Mark kept glancing at me, like he was waiting for something to break. After dinner, I cleared the dishes and wiped the counter. Then I sat across from him at the table, the same table where I'd first seen the empty account. "I went to see the house today," I said. The fork slipped from his hand and clattered against the plate. "You what?" "The one on Maple Ridge," I continued calmly. "The one Diane is flipping." He stared at me, his face dreaming of color. "How did you—" "I read your messages," I said. "I know you didn't want me to, but I did." His mouth opened, then closed. He looked smaller somehow, less certain. "I didn't want you involved," he said finally. "That wasn't your decision to make," I replied. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the length of the kitchen. "I was trying to protect you." "From what?" I asked. "From worrying," he said. "From stress. From this." I gestured between us. "You think this is better?" He stopped pacing. "Diane needed help." "And I didn't?" My voice was still steady, but my hands trembled under the table. He didn't answer. I took a breath. "How much of that house do we own?" He hesitated. "It's in her name." The words settled over me like ash. "In her name," I repeated. "She had to," he said quickly. "For the loan, for the paperwork, it's temporary." "And what legal protection do we have?" I asked. "We trust her," he said weakly. I pushed my chair back and stood. "Trust isn't a legal document, Mark." He flinched. That night, I slept in the guest room, not out of spite, out of necessity. I needed space to think, to breathe without the weight of his presence pressing against me. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I felt ridiculous at first, explaining my situation to a stranger, but as I spoke, as I laid out the facts, I heard my own story reflected back to me in clear, clinical terms. "You have no legal claim to that property," the lawyer said gently, "at least not based on what you've told me." I thanked her and hung up, my chest tight. I also called Elise. I hadn't planned to involve our children, but I needed someone who knew me, who would hear the pain in my voice. "Mom," she said, concern immediate. "What's wrong?" I told her everything, the savings, the house, the lies. There was a long silence on the other end. "Dad did what?" she asked finally. "I don't think he understands what he's done," I said. "He understands," she replied quietly. "He just didn't think he'd get caught." Her words stung because they rang too close to the truth. That weekend, I went back to the house on Maple Ridge. This time, I didn't stay in the car. I walked up the driveway, the gravel crunching under my shoes. The door was open, an open house. Inside, the place smelled like fresh paint and lemon cleaner. A young couple walked through the living room, murmuring to each other. A realtor stood by the kitchen island, smiling brightly. "Are you interested in the property?" she asked when she saw me. "I'm interested in the ownership," I said. Her expression faltered. "Excuse me?" "I believe my husband financed this renovation. I'd like to know where that's reflected in the listing." Her expression tightened. "You'll need to speak with the seller." "Diane Miller?" I asked. "Yes." I nodded. "I will." Diane called me that night, her tone sharp. "What were you thinking, showing up like that?" "I was thinking that you've been selling a house bought with my money," I replied. "You're overreacting," she snapped. "Mark agreed to this." "Mark doesn't get to agree on my behalf anymore." She scoffed. "You always were controlling." I laughed softly. "That's rich coming from you." There was a pause. Then she said, "If you cause trouble, you'll regret it." I hung up. When Mark found out, he exploded. "You embarrassed her," he shouted. "You made things worse." "No," I said quietly. "I made them visible." The fight that followed was the worst of our marriage, not because of the volume, but because of the truths that spilled out between raised voices. "You always come last," I said, tears finally falling, "after your sister, after her chaos, after her mistakes." "That's not fair," he said. "Isn't it?" I asked. He had no answer. The house sold 2 weeks later. Mark didn't tell me. I found out from the listing online. Sold. Closed. I sat at the computer, staring at the screen, waiting for the deposit notification that never came. That night, I confronted him again. "She kept the profit," he admitted, his voice barely audible. I felt something inside me go very still. "And what did you say?" I asked. He swallowed. "She said she needs it to get back on her feet." I nodded slowly. "And what about us?" "She said she'll pay us back," he whispered. "When?" I asked. He hesitated. I packed a bag that night, just clothes, toiletries, the small framed photo of Mark and me on our wedding day, smiling and hopeful. I wasn't ready to throw it away yet. "I'm not leaving forever," I told him at the door, "but I am leaving until you understand what you've done." He cried then, really cried, sank onto the couch, his face in his hands. "I didn't mean it to go this far," he said, "but it did." I stayed with Elise for a while, slept in the guest room, listened to the sounds of her household, the hum of life continuing. It reminded me that the world didn't end just because my marriage had cracked. Weeks passed. Mark called, apologized, promised to fix things. I listened. I didn't rush back. Then, one afternoon, Elise came home with a look I recognized. "Mom," she said, "you need to see this." She showed me a photo on her phone. Diane standing in front of a new condo, smiling, champagne flute in hand. The caption read, "New Beginnings." Something hardened in me then. Not bitterness, clarity. I realized that if I didn't act now, calmly, deliberately, I would lose more than money. I would lose myself. I stared at that photo for a long time after Elise handed me her phone back. Diane looked radiant, relaxed, the kind of relax that comes from landing safely after a fall someone else broke for you. The condo behind her had wide glass windows and a balcony overlooking the city, nothing like the cramped apartments she'd always complained about. I handed the phone back without a word. That night, I lay awake listening to the unfamiliar creaks of Elisa's house, the soft bud of her husband's footsteps downstairs, the low hum of the dishwasher. Life continuing, steady and unconcerned with my personal earthquake. I thought about the years I'd spent being accommodating, the times I'd swallowed my concerns because I didn't want to be the difficult wife, the times I told myself love meant patience. I realized then that patience without boundaries isn't love, it's erasure. The next morning, I called Mark. He answered on the first ring. "Emily?" "I saw the condo," I said. Silence. "She used our money to start over," I continued, "and you let her." "I didn't know," he said weakly. "That's the problem. You didn't know. You didn't ask. You didn't protect us." "I can talk to her," he said quickly. "I can make her understand." "No," I said. "I will." I drove to Diane's new place that afternoon. The building had a doorman. I'd never been in a place like that before. He looked at me skeptically when I gave her name, but eventually let me through. Diane opened the door wearing silk pajamas and a smile that faded the moment she saw me. "You have some nerve," she said. "So do you," I replied, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The condo was immaculate. New furniture, art on the walls, a faint scent of citrus and expensive candles. "This is what our savings bought?" I asked. "You don't understand how hard things have been for me," she snapped. "I understand perfectly," I said. "You used my husband's loyalty and my silence to fund your escape." She crossed her arms. "Mark offered, and you took," I said, "without a contract, without accountability." She laughed. "What are you going to do? Sue me?" I met her gaze. "If I have to." Her smile faltered. "I spoke to a lawyer," I continued. "I know I don't have a direct claim on the property, but I do have evidence of marital asset misuse, and more importantly, I have evidence of deception." Her face tightened. "You wouldn't." "I would," I said calmly, "not because I want to hurt you, but because I won't disappear to make you comfortable anymore." She studied me, her eyes sharp, calculating. "You'd ruin your marriage over this," she said. I thought of Mark, of the way he'd cried on the couch, of the years we'd built. "No," I said softly, "this already ruined it. I'm just deciding what survives." I left without another word. 2 days later, Mark called me, his voice strained. "She agreed to talk," he said. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our homes. Diane arrived late, sunglasses on, her posture defensive. Mark looked exhausted, older than I'd ever seen him. I laid out everything, the timeline, the transfers, the condo photo, the legal advice. "I'm not asking for charity, I'm asking for restitution." Diane scoffed. "I don't have that kind of money anymore." "I have assets and time." Mark finally spoke. "Diane, you have to fix this." She stared at him, incredulous. "You're taking her side?" "I'm taking responsibility, for once." Something shifted then, not dramatically, but enough. The agreement we reached wasn't perfect, it wouldn't make us whole again, but it was real. Diane would repay a portion of the money monthly. She would sign a notarized acknowledgement of the debt. No more vague promises, no more trust without terms. When we left the coffee shop, Mark walked beside me in silence. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said eventually, "but I want to earn back your respect." I looked at him, really looked. "That will take time and honesty, complete honesty." He nodded. I moved back home slowly, not all at once. A night here, a weekend there. We started counseling, learned how to talk without deflecting, without hiding. Mark cut financial ties with his sister, set boundaries he'd never had before. It didn't come naturally, but he tried. Some days were harder than others. Trust doesn't return in a rush. It comes in small, quiet moments. A shared account login, a conversation before a decision, a question asked instead of an assumption made. One evening, months later, I sat at the same dining table with a cup of chamomile tea, this time still warm. The numbers on the screen weren't what they used to be, but they were honest. Mark came up behind me and rested his shoulder on my shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said. Not for the first time, but this time it felt different, grounded. "I know," I replied. What we had now wasn't the same marriage we started with. It was more fragile, but also more real. And as strange as it sounds, I wouldn't trade that clarity for the illusion we lived in before. The seasons changed quietly, the way they always do when you're not paying attention. One day, the trees outside our kitchen window were bare and gray, their branches like tired hands reaching for nothing. Then, almost without warning, small green buds appeared, life insisting on itself. Mark and I were still in counseling when spring arrived. Every Wednesday evening, we sat across from each other in a softly lit room that smelled faintly of lavender and old books. The therapist asked questions that forced us to slow down, to listen without preparing our defenses. "What does safety look like to you now?" she asked me once. I thought about it for a long moment. "It looks like transparency," I said. "It looks like being considered, not as an afterthought, but as an equal." Mark nodded, his eyes fixed on the carpet. For him, safety meant something different. It meant letting go of the role he'd worn for so long, the fixer, the savior. It meant accepting that love didn't require self-destruction or secrecy. Some nights after those sessions, we sat in the car in silence before driving home. Not awkward silence, reflective silence, the kind that allows room for truths to settle. Diane kept her distance. Her payments came on time every month, no apologies attached, no notes, just transactions. I didn't need remorse from her. Accountability was enough. One afternoon, I ran into her unexpectedly at the grocery store. She looked thinner, more tired. The shine from the condo photo had dulled. "Emily," she said stiffly. "Diane," I replied. We stood there for a moment, two women bound by a man and a history neither of us could rewrite. "I never meant to hurt you," she said finally. "I believe you, and I did, but intent doesn't erase impact." She nodded, then walked away. That was the last real conversation we had. At home, Mark and I began rebuilding in small, practical ways. We downsized our expectations, adjusted timelines, let go of certain dreams so others could take their place. We took long walks in the evenings. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we didn't. The sound of our footsteps sinking on the pavement felt like a quiet promise. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the trees, Mark spoke. "I didn't think," he said. "I thought loyalty meant sacrifice. I didn't realize who I was sacrificing." I leaned back in my chair, listening. "I see it now, and I'm ashamed." I reached for his hand, not to comfort him, but to acknowledge the truth of the moment. Shame can teach if you let it. He squeezed my hand, grateful. Months later, Elise came to visit. We sat at the table, the three of us, sharing coffee and laughter that felt earned. "I'm proud of you," she said to me when Mark stepped out of the room. "For what?" I asked. "For choosing yourself," she replied. Her words stayed with me. Choosing yourself doesn't mean abandoning others. It means refusing to disappear. Our finances recovered slowly. We adjusted our lifestyle, found contentment in simplicity. Retirement looked different now, but not worse, just honest. One evening, Mark brought out an old photo album. We flipped through pages filled with younger versions of ourselves, smiles that hadn't yet known betrayal, eyes full of trust. "We were happy," he said softly. "We were, and we can be again, just not the same way." That truth didn't scare me anymore. The marriage we have now is quieter, less naive, more deliberate. We speak up, we question, we listen, and in that honesty there is a peace I didn't expect. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about the woman I was before that night at the dining table, the one who trusted without question, the one who believed love alone was enough. I don't judge her. She did the best she could with what she knew, but I'm grateful for the woman I became, the one who asked hard questions, the one who drew lines, the one who learned that dignity is a form of love, too. There are moments now, small ones, ordinary ones, when I catch myself pausing in the middle of a day that looks peaceful from the outside. Mark rinsing a coffee mug at the sink, the afternoon light stretching across the living room floor, the low murmur of the evening news playing in the background. And in those moments, I check in with myself. Not because I'm suspicious, but because I've learned the value of awareness. I ask myself quietly, do I feel heard right now? Do I feel safe speaking? Do I feel like an equal participant in my own life? That habit didn't come from marriage counseling alone. It came from loss, from the shock of realizing how much can be taken from you, not in one dramatic moment, but in small, justifiable pieces, each one explained away as necessary or temporary or for family. I used to think betrayal always arrived loudly, with shouting or slammed doors or undeniable proof. But sometimes betrayal wears the face of good intentions. Sometimes it sounds like, "I didn't want to worry you." Sometimes it sounds like, "I thought you'd say no." Sometimes it hides behind, "She needs me more right now." And when you're a woman who spent her life being capable, reliable, steady, you don't always notice when people start leaning on that steadiness instead of standing beside you. That's something I wish I'd understood earlier. I also wish I'd understood that financial betrayal isn't just about money. It's about agency, about being removed from decisions that shape your future, about waking up one day and realizing that the life you thought you were building together was quietly being rerouted without your consent. That kind of betrayal shakes your sense of reality. For a long time after everything came out, I questioned myself more than I questioned Mark. Why didn't I see it sooner? Why did I ignore that feeling in my chest? Why did I let myself be so patient? But eventually, I stopped asking why I trusted and started honoring the fact that I did. Trust is not foolish. Love is not weakness. Believing in partnership is not a flaw. What matters is what you do when that trust is broken. Some women stay because the partner takes responsibility and changes. Some leave because the cost of staying is too high. Both choices require courage. What doesn't heal anyone is silence. If I had stayed quiet, if I had swallowed my anger, accepted the loss, told myself at least he didn't cheat, I would have survived, yes, but I would have disappeared a little more each day. And that kind of survival isn't living. Today, Mark and I still talk openly about money, about family, about boundaries, not because we're fragile, but because we're aware. There's a difference. When Diane's name comes up now, it doesn't send a ripple through my chest. It's just a name, a chapter that's closed. The debt continues to be paid, slowly, predictably, without emotion attached. And that's how I know I've healed. Not because the story ended perfectly, but because it no longer owns me. I've learned that peace doesn't come from everything being fair. It comes from knowing where you stand. If you're listening to this story and something in it feels familiar, if you've ever felt sidelined in your own marriage, dismissed in the name of family, or kept in the dark because someone decided you were too emotional to handle the truth, please hear this. You are not unreasonable for wanting transparency. You are not selfish for expecting partnership. You are not dramatic for reacting to betrayal. Your instincts matter. And if you're standing at a crossroads right now, wondering whether to confront, whether to stay, whether to leave, give yourself permission to pause, to gather information, to choose clarity over comfort. You don't have to make the loudest choice. You just have to make the one that lets you keep your dignity. So I'll ask you gently, the way I wish someone had asked me sooner. If the roles were reversed, if it were your savings, your future, your trust, what would you have done? Life didn't suddenly become peaceful after that. That's something people don't tell you enough, that even after truth comes out, after apologies are made, after lines are drawn, the emotional dust doesn't just settle on command. It drifts, it resurfaces, it catches the light at unexpected angles. A few months after everything with Diane stabilized, Mark came home one afternoon quieter than usual. Not withdrawn, just careful. I noticed it the way I notice most things now. Not with suspicion, with attention. "What's on your mind?" I asked as I set a bowl of soup in front of him. He stirred it absently. "I ran into my cousin today, at work." I nodded, waiting. "She asked how things were going, with us." He looked up. I didn't know how to answer. That surprised me. Why not? "Because I didn't want to make myself sound better than I was," he said, "and I didn't want to make you sound like the problem." I sat down across from him. "What did you say?" "That we're rebuilding," he replied, "that I made choices I'm still answering for." Something in my chest loosened at that. Not pride, relief. "Thank you," I said. He nodded. "I'm done protecting lies, even polite ones." That was new, and it mattered more than he realized. A week later, we hosted Jonah for dinner. It was the first time we'd all sat together since the worst of it. The air was tentative at first, like everyone was testing the temperature before stepping in. Halfway through the meal, Jonah set his fork down. "Dad," he said carefully, "Mom told me what happened." Mark didn't look away. "I know." "And?" asked Jonah. "And I messed up," he replied, "badly." There was no defensiveness, no minimizing, just the truth laid bare. Jonah glanced at me. "Are you okay?" I smiled gently. "I am. Not perfect, not untouched, but okay." That night, after Jonah left, Mark sat on the edge of the bed, his shoulders heavy. "I hate that they had to see me like that," he said. "I think they needed to," I replied, "so they know accountability exists in this family." He nodded slowly. Another small shift. Our social circle adjusted too. Some people knew, some didn't. A few made careless comments about family always coming first. I stopped nodding along. "Family includes spouses," I said once, calmly, "not just blood." The room went quiet, and then conversation moved on. I didn't feel the need to explain myself anymore. One afternoon, while reorganizing the filing cabinet, I came across old bank statements from years ago, pages and pages of careful planning, evidence of a woman who had always been steady, responsible, invested. I realized something then. Even when Mark took that money, even when Diane misused it, I had not failed. I had been betrayed. There is a difference. That distinction freed me of a lot of unnecessary shame. Later that week, Mark and I went for a drive. No destination, just the road stretching ahead of us, the radio playing softly. "I don't expect you to trust me the way you used to," he said suddenly. I looked out the window at the passing trees. "I don't want to." He glanced at me. "You don't?" No, I said. I want a better kind of trust, one that includes transparency, conversation, consent. He nodded. I can do that. And for the first time, I believed him, not because of his words, but because of the months of changed behavior behind them. Trust rebuilt is quieter than trust naive, but it's stronger. One evening, I logged into our bank account, still something I did intentionally, not compulsively, and saw the latest repayment from Diane, balance slightly higher than the month before. I closed the laptop and didn't feel the need to tell Mark right away. Not because I was hiding it, because I knew it wasn't my burden alone anymore. That realization felt like progress. As summer arrived, Mark suggested a weekend trip. Nothing extravagant, a small town a few hours away, somewhere neutral. I considered it carefully before agreeing. We walked along a river path, shared meals at small cafes, talked about things that had nothing to do with money or family drama, and also talked about the things that still did. There was room now for both. On the last night, sitting on a bench watching the water move steadily past, Mark said, I know I can't undo what I did. I don't need you to. I need you to keep showing up differently. He nodded. I will. And he has. Not perfectly, but consistently. That's the part I want to be honest about. Healing didn't come from a single confrontation, or a single apology, or even a single decision to stay. It came from patterns changing, from silence being replaced with conversation, from assumptions being replaced with questions, from loyalty being redirected to where it belonged. There are still moments when something catches in my chest, a story on the news, a conversation about retirement, a passing comment about helping family. But now those moments don't swallow me. They remind me of what I survived, of what I demanded, of what I refused to lose. I didn't get all the money back, but I got something far more valuable, my voice, my agency, my place at the table. And no one, not family, not love, not history, gets to take that from me again. The months that followed were slower than I expected. Not slow in a bad way, slow in the sense that life finally had space to breathe. The chaos of betrayal, the emotional whirlwind, the endless questioning, it all receded into the background, leaving room for ordinary, small moments to matter. I started keeping a journal again, something I hadn't done in years, not for storytelling, not for reflection to others, but for myself. Every evening, I'd sit at the kitchen table, a pen in hand, the low hum of the refrigerator in the background, and write down observations, little victories, tiny joys, thoughts I hadn't voiced aloud. It helped me track progress I hadn't noticed day to day, the fact that I could now speak freely about finances without tension, the fact that Mark came to me first when difficult decisions arose, the fact that I could sit quietly in a room with Diane and not feel the old tightness in my chest. One Thursday afternoon, Mark suggested we take a short trip to the mountains. A weekend, he said. No schedules, no phones, no obligations. Just us. I hesitated. The idea of being away from routine made me anxious at first, but the thought of being together, unpressured, sounded like a balm. We left early Saturday morning. The road was winding, the air fresh and crisp. Mark drove, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the urge to micromanage every turn or speed bump. I let go. By mid-afternoon, we arrived at a small cabin tucked into a clearing among pine trees. The place smelled faintly of cedar and wood polish, and a fire crackled in the stone hearth. I unpacked slowly, lingering over each item as though savoring the act itself. Mark wandered to the porch and called, "You should see this view." I stepped outside, and the mountains stretched endlessly, ridges rolling into the horizon, painted with the muted colors of early autumn. The sun was low, golden and soft. "This is incredible," I said, inhaling deeply. Mark came up behind me, resting his hands on my shoulders. "It is," he said softly, "and we get to share it without all the drama weighing us down." I nodded. It felt surreal to say that aloud. The weight had been lifted, partially by accountability, partially by time, and partially by the conscious choice to not dwell in anger. That night, we cooked together in the small kitchen, the chopping of vegetables, the simmering of sauces, the aroma of roasted chicken filling the cabin. It all felt grounding. We talked quietly about everything and nothing, plans for the next few months, updates about Elise, little jokes only we found funny. As the evening deepened, I realized something. The sense of ease I felt wasn't just relief, it was stability, a rhythm built on awareness, not ignorance, communication, not assumption, and accountability, not avoidance. The next morning, Mark and I hiked a narrow trail that wound alongside a bubbling creek. The water rushed over rocks with a persistent, relentless energy. I stopped for a moment, crouching by the edge, letting the cold spray hit my hands. "Feels cleansing," I murmured. Mark knelt beside me. "Feels like moving forward," he said. And that was exactly what it felt like, moving forward, not forgetting, not pretending it never happened, not minimizing the hurt, but acknowledging it, learning from it, and stepping beyond it. Later, while sitting on a fallen log and catching our breath, Mark reached into his backpack and pulled out a small photo album he had secretly packed. I raised an eyebrow. "It's from before all the chaos," he said. "Just reminders, not to idealize the past, just to remember the foundation." We flipped through the pages together, photographs of family gatherings, birthdays, vacations, moments of laughter, of shared triumphs, of quiet evenings just like this one. I realized then that the foundation was still there, solid. It had been cracked, tested, and challenged, but not destroyed. We returned from the mountains with a renewed sense of balance. Back home, life resumed, but with a different pace. The old triggers, mentions of Diane, questions about finances, even passing comments from relatives, no longer elicited panic. They were acknowledged, processed, and set aside. One evening, while Mark and I sat on the porch with cups of tea, I realized how far we'd come. We no longer tiptoed around each other's emotions. We spoke openly. We argued calmly when we disagreed. We listened more than we spoke, and when we spoke, we did so with intent. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Mark asked quietly. "Every now and then," I admitted, "but I don't dwell there. I focus on what we're building now." He nodded. "Me too. It's strange, isn't it, how much clarity comes after chaos?" I smiled. "Yes, strange, but worth it." The next week, we hosted a small gathering for friends. Nothing formal, just an evening of food, conversation, and laughter. I noticed the subtle differences in myself, the ease of conversation, the confidence in asserting my opinions, the comfort in setting boundaries. Mark and I worked together seamlessly, not as a team forced by circumstance, but as partners who would learn to communicate and respect each other. Later that evening, when the guests left, Mark sat across from me at the kitchen table. "You know," he said, "I never thought we'd get here. I thought the damage would be permanent." "I thought so too," I replied. "But here we are, still standing, stronger in some ways, wiser, hopefully." He reached for my hand, and I let him, not for reassurance, not for apology, but simply as a gesture of presence, of partnership, of shared understanding. In the quiet moments that followed, I reflected on the journey, the fear, the anger, the doubt, the confrontations, the restitution. They were all parts of the story. But the ongoing work, the rebuilding, the slow reclaiming of voice and agency, that was where life truly began again. Mark and I began a tradition after that, a nightly walk around the block, a few minutes to talk about the day, to acknowledge small victories, and to share any lingering concerns. It was a way to stay connected, to notice what might otherwise be missed, and to reinforce trust before it could fray again. I also started mentoring a close friend who was going through her own struggles with trust and marriage. I shared with her not the gory details, but the lessons: how to assert boundaries, how to demand transparency, how to reclaim one's voice without destroying relationships unnecessarily. Through her, I saw the ripple effect of what I had learned. The sense of agency and clarity that I had fought to regain wasn't mine alone. It could be shared, taught, and passed forward. At home, life continued quietly. The house was no longer a place of fear or tension. It became a place of grounding. The dining table, once a site of revelation and confrontation, now served as a place for meals, conversations, planning, and quiet reflection. I realized something important in those months. Healing is not linear. There were setbacks, small arguments, minor misunderstandings, days when the past crept back into the present, but the difference was in how we handled them. We no longer reacted with fear or defensiveness. We approached problems with awareness, patience, and communication. By the time a full year had passed since Diane's final repayment, Mark and I had settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable. We celebrated small victories, the children's achievements, quiet weekends together, a sense of financial stability restored, not in extravagance, but in honesty. One evening after dinner, Mark brought out an old photo of our first apartment. We laughed at how cramped it was, at the peeling wallpaper, the tiny kitchen, the awkward furniture. But I saw something in that photo, a resilience that had always been there. That resilience had carried us through more than I had imagined it could have. I put my hand on the photo. "We made it," I said softly. Mark nodded. "We did. Not perfect, not easy, but we made it." And in that moment, I understood that life after betrayal isn't about forgetting. It's about living with awareness, choosing actions deliberately, and standing firmly in the truth of who you are and what you deserve. We had been tested, we had been challenged, but we survived not by ignoring reality, not by retreating into silence, and not by letting anger control us. We survived by seeing clearly, by setting boundaries, by holding ourselves accountable, and by insisting that respect and communication remain at the center of our family. Looking back, I realized the story wasn't only about lost money, or even about Diane, or even about Mark's choices. It was about reclaiming a life that could have been quietly stolen, about demanding presence and honesty, and about understanding that dignity is something worth defending fiercely. That night, as I tucked Elise in and kissed Jonah on the forehead, I felt a deep, quiet. The months rolled on, and with them came a new rhythm, steady, deliberate, and quiet in a way that felt almost luxurious after the turbulence we had endured. Mark and I had learned to operate not out of fear or reaction, but with conscious awareness, and it changed everything. We had started to enjoy life again. Simple things, the smell of morning coffee, the feel of the sun streaming through the windows, the sound of children's laughter echoing down the hall had returned their full weight. I noticed them in ways I hadn't before, as if the storm we had survived had heightened my senses, attuning me to the beauty of the ordinary. One Saturday, I found myself in the garden, kneeling among the flower beds, planting marigolds and pansies for the coming season. Mark joined me with a small trowel and a bag of soil. He worked quietly, filling holes and patting down dirt with deliberate care. Every so often, he looked up at me and smiled, the kind of soft, genuine smile that reassured me of the person he had become. "You've gotten really good at this," I said, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "I've had a good teacher," he replied. "You always seem to know where things should go." We worked in silence after that, comfortable in the shared rhythm. It wasn't the tense, cautious interaction we had learned during the early months after the betrayal. It was trust, manifested in small gestures, the unspoken acknowledgement that both of us were fully present, fully committed, and fully aware of our shared life. Later that afternoon, we hosted a small family gathering. Elise and her children came over, and for the first time in a long time, it felt natural. There were no lingering tensions, no unspoken fears, just the hum of conversation and laughter. Jonah, now confident and chatty, recounted a project from school. Elise smiled at him, clearly proud, and I felt warmth spread through me at the sight. Mark listened attentively, occasionally interjecting with a gentle tease or a word of encouragement. The atmosphere was light, genuine, and unforced, a stark contrast to the heaviness we had lived under for months. After everyone had left, Mark and I sat on the porch. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky with hues of gold and orange. We held our mugs of tea, sitting close but without the need for constant conversation. There was a sense of ease between us, a quiet acknowledgement of the distance we had traveled together. "You know," Mark said, breaking the silence, "I think we finally understand what partnership really means." I nodded. Yes. It's not just living together, it's speaking openly, being accountable and supporting each other, not just in good times, but through the worst. He reached for my hand, a gentle squeeze that didn't require words. I returned it, feeling the steadiness of his presence and the reassurance it brought. Over the next few weeks, I noticed other subtle shifts in our lives. Mark began to involve me in decisions he had once taken unilaterally: financial planning, family events, even small day-to-day choices. I no longer felt excluded, sidelined, or dismissed. Each time he asked for my input or listened carefully to my concerns, it reinforced the lessons we had learned the hard way. We also revisited old financial goals. With Diane's repayment complete, we were able to stabilize our accounts and plan for the future without the shadow of secrecy hanging over us. We created a budget that reflected both of our priorities, ensuring that neither of us felt excluded from the planning process. The sense of mutual respect in these decisions felt empowering, as if we were reclaiming a part of our lives that had been jeopardized. One afternoon, I found myself sitting by the window, watching the neighborhood kids play in the street. I reflected on the journey we had taken over the past year, the moments of doubt, the confrontations, the sleepless nights, the careful navigation of trust, and the painstaking rebuilding of our partnership. I realized that every small choice we had made, every conversation we had navigated with honesty, had led us to a place of genuine stability. Mark came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my shoulders. "Thinking again?" he asked softly. "Just reflecting. On everything. On how far we've come." He pressed his cheek to mine. "It hasn't been easy, but we made it, and that's what counts." "Yes," I whispered, "we made it. Not by avoiding the storm, but by facing it together." That evening, we went to a small local festival. The streets were filled with music, the smell of food vendors, and the laughter of children chasing each other through the crowd. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely present, untethered from past anxieties, and confident in the solidity of our life together. We wandered through the festival, sampling treats, listening to live music, and watching street performers. The joy was not extravagant, but it was genuine, and it was ours. As we sat on a bench near the fountain, Mark turned to me. "Do you ever think about the past year, about everything that happened?" "Every day," I admitted, "but not with bitterness anymore. I think about it with perspective now." "Perspective?" he asked. "Yes, perspective. I see the choices we made, the mistakes, the betrayals, but I also see how we rebuilt, how we grew, how we became stronger because of it. I see the lessons, not just the pain." He nodded thoughtfully. "I feel the same. I know I've hurt you deeply, but I also know we've learned from it. We're building something better now, together." We sat in silence for a few moments, watching the water in the fountain sparkle in the late afternoon sun. The peace between us felt earned, steady, and durable. It was not naive, it was not fragile, it was resilient. Returning home that evening, I felt a quiet pride in how far we had come. Our home, once a site of tension and hidden betrayal, had become a place of communication, trust, and mutual respect. Every corner, every room, every familiar scent, coffee brewing in the kitchen, the faint aroma of Mark's aftershave, the soft creak of the porch floor, was imbued with a sense of stability we consciously rebuilt. Mark and I began planning small projects together around the house, fixing the garden shed, repainting rooms, and organizing the attic. Each task, though mundane, became an exercise in cooperation and mutual respect. We learned to delegate responsibilities fairly, communicate our expectations clearly, and appreciate each other's contributions. One evening, while Mark worked on a shelf in the garage, I found myself thinking about Diane. For the first time in months, the thought did not provoke anger or anxiety. It was merely an acknowledgement of the past, a recognition that some chapters in life are closed without needing active engagement. Her actions had consequences, they had been addressed, and her role in our lives was no longer defining or destructive. Elise called one afternoon to share news of a promotion at work. We celebrated together, laughing and talking about plans for the family. Jonah had a school project coming up, and we brainstormed ideas as a family. These moments of collaboration and shared joy reminded me how much the past year had shifted our focus from survival to thriving. Mark and I also began weekly check-in sessions. Every Sunday evening, we would sit together, review the week, discuss concerns, plan for upcoming events, and voice any lingering frustrations. This practice became a cornerstone of our partnership. It wasn't about policing each other, it was about creating a space for honest communication and reinforcing mutual accountability. Through these practices, I noticed another change in myself. I no longer felt compelled to apologize for my emotions or to justify my perspective to avoid conflict. I had learned the value of asserting boundaries calmly, consistently, and respectfully. I had reclaimed my agency, my voice, and my sense of self within the marriage. As autumn approached, the first leaves began to turn golden and red. I took long walks with Mark in the evenings, savoring the crisp air and the soft crunch of leaves underfoot. These walks became a ritual, a time to reflect, connect, and simply enjoy the presence of one another without distraction or tension. During one such walk, Mark stopped and turned to me. "I'm grateful for your patience, for staying, for holding me accountable, for helping me become a better person." I smiled. It hasn't been easy for either of us, but we made choices that matter, and we're still making them every day. He nodded, pulling me into a hug. Every day. It was in moments like these, ordinary, quiet, unremarkable on the surface, that I truly understood the depth of what we had survived. Betrayal, deception, and fractured trust could have destroyed us, but instead they became the catalysts for growth, understanding, and resilience. At home, life continued with its usual rhythm: dinners shared, laughter over minor mishaps, homework with Elise, bedtime routines with Jonah. But underlying all of it was a new foundation: honesty, transparency, and mutual respect. Every action, every word, every decision was a conscious choice rather than a reaction to fear or past hurt. One evening, I found myself sitting by the window, sipping tea, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Mark joined me, and we sat side by side, comfortable in silence. The faint rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant hum of traffic, and the occasional chirp of crickets created a peaceful soundtrack. I realized then that life after betrayal isn't about grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. It's about the steady accumulation of small, consistent actions that rebuild trust, restore agency,